So here's a little bit different Q&A than we normally do. We're going to concentrate on one single question here. I've got Kevin to help me out with this one. This is a question that came in the email from Stacy. And she's asking, and there's several different questions running back and forth, but this is mostly about Barm. Let me read this final comment from Stacy. And what she's trying to do is come up with barm to make bread with, and we'll talk about what barm is here in a second if you're not sure. Anyway, her little statement or her comment here is: after connecting with a brewery in my city, I'm not able to obtain barm from them. Is there a way to make my own? Seems that some people brew at home. Thanks. I'm looking forward to the videos about bread making using barm. So I brought Kevin in because he's a little bit more experienced with specifically brewing, and we both worked a lot through this barm issue. Really, it's kind of come up over and over again in the videos we've done. So let's talk a little bit about barm. So first, tell me exactly what barm is.
Okay, you read about barm in the 18th century cookbooks. Barm is you also hear some cookbooks refer to it as emptins.
Right.
It's the leftover scum off a fermenter when you make beer. Mm-hmm. And what it is it's spent yeast that falls to the bottom of the fermenter.
It's not the krausen that comes off the top?
Sometimes it is the krausen.
Okay.
Other times they actually gathered it from both places. Right. The krausen, which is the foam that rises off the top in the fermenter, or the emptins, or the lees, they call it, in the bottom of the fermenters.
Right. And this is something that the brewers would sell as a secondary product. Right. It's something left over. You wouldn't throw it out, but you'd sell it to local bakers, either home bakers or commercial bakers, so that they could use it to bake their bread with. They might use it for cakes, for different kinds of little, buns or whatever. Right. all kinds of baked products that you want, that we would use yeast for today.
Right. Now, barm has a distinct flavor to it. Depends on the type of beer that was brewed.
Right.
The hops that's added to the beer. When it's boiled, it releases amino acids, and so it's kind of a bitter flavor that actually comes out in the barm. And if you use barm in bread, depending on how heavily hopped it is, that flavor will actually show up. We found that it shows up in the crust primarily. It seems to be concentrated in the crust. Mm-hmm. And so we know that in the 18th century, there were some people who were actually concerned about that bitter flavor, and they would do things like wash the yeast. They would dilute it, let it settle, pour off the water. They would also make a sponge out of it and feed the sponge to dilute the hoppy flavor in the.
You definitely don't want that hop flavor coming through in your cake.
Right.
On your bun. I mean, you might be all right with it in bread, but most people we've talked to today who've tried to use barm directly don't like the bread. Way too beery flavor. Right. Way too much hop flavor.
But it is interesting, though, that there are indications that that's what people expected. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we have run across recipes from the early 1900s where they're trying to imitate that hoppy flavor from the barm.
Yeah, there's a little booklet that Horsford that made baking powder. At the time, when you bought your baking powder, you got these little recipes in it, and they were talking about baking bread with baking powder instead of with yeast. But it said if you want that kind of home-baked bread flavor, you should put some hops in there to get that hoppy flavor, which. Very interesting. All the way in after the 19th century, you're getting that reference.
Right.
So apparently people are expecting some hop flavor in their bread.
Yeah. Now, regarding Stacy's question, my question for her would be, what are you trying to do with this? Are you trying to do like a historical demonstration at an event, or are you just wanting to know what the flavor of this is, what it tastes like? If you're doing this at an event and you don't have access to barm,
right,
you can make an imitation barm using an ale, and I would suggest a lightly hopped ale, not like an India Pale Ale that's got a lot
intense
of
flavor.
right.
Yeah.
An English brown ale is a good one, or any American beer even, which would be more like a small beer. Use that in combination with flour and modern baker's yeast. Baker's yeast and brewer's yeast, it's actually the same species that is, brewer's yeast for ale is the same species. The brewers refine their yeast to get different results. But it is basically the same thing, and we trace that right back, the 18th century. It was the brewer who provided yeast for the baker.
Right.
If you're wanting to try Barm just to experience the flavor, rather than go to a brewer to try and get Barm, I suggest going to your local home brew club. Get on Facebook or Google it, your area brewers clubs, and a lot of times people are eager to help in that way. That's how I've gotten it in the past. Those lees are typically things that they discard anyway.
Yeah.
So
they don't want it. Now you kind of do have to get them fresh, right?
Right.
You could even try to make yeast cakes or store it, like we talked about in the Ryan Indian bread episode that we just did.
Right.
She talks about storing that. Now, she's fed that same technique that we talked about, that 18th century bakers would do, where they would feed that yeast and continue to let it grow a couple of days so that they could dilute the hops flavor out. That same thing is going to be happening there. If you want directions for that sort of faux barm, the easy to do demonstration kind of barm, we do that in the Wigs episode. I think that was in the second season. I'll put that down, or we'll put that down in the description section so you can see that. And we may in the future do one of those yeast episodes where we make those yeast cakes. We also have a couple of episodes called Which Yeast? And I think there's another one in that bread series where we talk about yeasts and storing them for long-term purposes. So those would be good episodes too. We'll try to find those, put those in the description section.
Right. John, there is one other thing that I want to talk about, and this is really where my food nerdiness comes out. You read in the 18th century texts as well as modern texts, there are how many ingredients? Flour, water, yeast, and salt.
Yeah.
The basic ingredients for bread. There's actually a fifth ingredient that is not talked about, and that's barley. And barley serves a really interesting role in all of this. There's an enzyme in barley that converts sugars in the flour that's not present in wheat. And so you get a nice golden crust. And modern flours, most modern flours add barley malt.
Just a little bit.
Yep, for that purpose. If you're using like a stone ground wheat that's just pure wheat, and you try and use a modern yeast, your crust is not going to be as golden brown as if you were using a modern flour. In the 18th century, that fifth ingredient, the barley, that was in the barm from the beer. And so it's an interesting switch in ingredients from the 18th century to modern times. That barley, that fifth ingredient, was originally in the barm, and as there was a switch to modern
Pure
yeast,
the
barm then switched was moved over into the flour.
Right, and that
or the barley was moved over into the flour.
And that coloration in the crust isn't just color; it's taste.
Right, exactly. It's caramelization of sugar.
Right.
The conversion of starches to sugars, and the heat then caramelizes it on the crust.
There's so much about this topic, about baking in general, but yeasts and the brewing and the connection between brewing and breads. We'll probably definitely cover that more in the future. We've got some more episodes coming up where we're probably going to touch a lot more on beer and how that connects with food in the 18th century. So make sure to stay tuned for that as we get there. I want to thank you for all these great questions that come in that really feed us and make us dig into those rabbit trails, find this really interesting stuff as we dig back into the 18th century. So thank you so much for your comments and questions. Keep them coming. And thank you for all your support, and thank you so much today for watching.
Hi, we're from Pickering Museum Village in Canada. We're on a road trip and we bought tons of stuff here. The people are so friendly and we love the product, so you got to come here and shop.